Well, and on that note of hitting every single corner of this world, we have seen major protests in solidarity with the uprising here in the United States and also highlighting similar instances in their own country all around the world. Solidarity from many different places. Paris, France, I know has been one that a lot of people have seen all over the news. But one place I bet you haven't seen in the news that is sending solidarity are workers in Myanmar, garment workers in Myanmar who are working in these sweatshop conditions, making the clothes for these major brands, many of which you know. You can see here this photo to my left there. Federation of Garment Workers of Myanmar stands in solidarity with the American sisters and brothers in the struggle against racism. Black Lives Matter. Really powerful. We also have a video message here that came from those garment workers to those struggling in the United States. Well, certainly workers there in Myanmar taking a deep interest in showing solidarity with the uprising against racism happening in this country. And to give you more information about what's happening for these workers in their country, we were able to interview a labor organizer helping these workers push forward their efforts to unionize and improve their working conditions. And we are very honored to be joined by the labor organizer, Andrew Tillett-Sacks, who's based in Myanmar, for this conversation. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us here on Breakthrough.
Hey, Eugene, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think that for a lot of our listeners, there's probably some general knowledge that in Southeast Asia and in South Asia, there's a lot of the garment industry. Obviously, a lot of the manufacturing is happening there. I think people know that has maybe some connection to some of the brands they know. But if you could just maybe give us a sense of the lay of the land in Myanmar and the broader region, to the extent you think it's relevant, of sort of what's the state of the industry, of the garment worker industry, and what is the connection to some of the brands people may know here in the U.S.?
Well, I guess the general state, Eugene, of the garment industry is that it's absolute hell to work in, just in general, even before the pandemic. The working conditions are unbelievably bad. It's almost impossible to describe until you see it yourself. But, you know, if you've read stuff like Upton St. Clair's The Jungle, or, you know, descriptions of the factories in England in the 19th century, it's like that, where, you know, most of the workers are working 70 to 75-hour weeks. In Myanmar, it varies a little bit, but in Myanmar, almost all the workers are making roughly, $3 to $4 a day. The sexual harassment in the garment industry of women workers is unbelievably rampant. In Myanmar, for example, the workforce is about 90% young females, and the sexual harassment is, I would say, in about 19 out of every 20 factories of the workers I'm able to talk to. Not clean drinking water, no fire exits. Workers aren't allowed to use the bathroom. Workers aren't allowed to leave the premises of the factory until the shift is done. Things like that are commonplace. So it's just an absolute hellacious, inhumane place to work. And this is where most of your clothing is being made. I mean, these are not exceptionally bad places. This is where Nike's produced. This is where Adidas is produced. This is where Zara is produced. This is where H&M produced. Most likely the clothes on your back are made under these conditions, with this type of exploitation being the foundation for how you get your clothing. And so that's before the pandemic. I guess I would say now the state of affairs is, if there was any hope for this industry and the working conditions changing, it was in some of the burgeoning trade union movements in these countries, where workers are expectedly organizing unions, organizing strikes, organizing fightbacks to demand that they get treated with some humanity, and to demand that they get at least some share of the mass profits they're producing for these brands. And the pandemic has essentially brought on, a period of what people would describe as disaster capitalism or shock doctrine tactics from the capitalists in these countries, from the factory owners and from the brands,
right,
where they're attempting to seize upon the crisis to try to essentially extinguish any of the flickers of worker organizing or any of the flickers of trade union organizing and labor movements that have been starting to gather. And so what you're seeing now is things like union activists who are speaking up for improvement of working conditions or for things just like proper PPE and COVID-19 safety precautions being thrown in jail. So in Myanmar, for example, there's several cases where workers have led strikes in demanding proper safety precautions in these factories due to COVID-19. Several of them have been thrown in jail and are sitting in jail right now. In Cambodia as well, we've got a case where a union leader posted on Facebook when an employer was refusing to give them proper PPE. She's been in jail for 2 months with her health deteriorating. In addition to the imprisonment, we're seeing a lot of mass firings of union members. So factories where they have organized a union, the factory owners are coming and saying, well, we're not getting as many orders from the brands because of the pandemic.
right.
And we're not getting as much raw material because of international border restrictions. Thereby, we have to dismiss all of the union members. And that's 500, 600, 700 union members while they permit the non-union workers to keep working. So it's a complete facade, right?
Right.
It's just attempting to use COVID-19 as a pretext to bust the unions. And it's getting worse and worse. And it's generally the factory owners taking these actions to try to bust the unions. But it's the brands who they supply who are remaining silent, even though they really hold all of the power in the industry.
Right.
In the garment industry, when the brands say jump, the factory owners say how high. It's the power dynamic in the industry. And so even though we're contacting all of these brands, they know all of this stuff is going on. They're refusing to speak up about it. They're remaining silent about it. And they are deeply, deeply complicit in some of these awful violations of workers' rights and mistreatment of the workers making their clothing going on right now.
I'm really, and thank you so much for that overview. And I really think that's such an important point that you ended on because, the statements that you see released by these brands, oh, well, we're paying attention to it. Oh, we know this is going on. I mean, it's all just like fobbing it off on, well, those people over there, we don't control them. But I mean, without the huge amount of capital, the infrastructure, the branding, all of that, the industry doesn't exist. So, I mean, it seems like that in and of itself is such a major element of this. I think for people, our audience, mainly in the United States, to understand is that the complicity for this rests so heavily, with entities that we know, and it's not just some, oh, well, there's nothing we can do sort of problem.
Absolutely, Eugene. So for me, it's not just theoretical. I can say concretely, I sit in these negotiations with the factory owners, and the factory owners say to us directly, if you get the brands to tell us to do something, for example, to reinstate the workers we fired, we'll do it. So far, they have not told us to do it, so we're not going to do it. There can be no mistake, despite how much the brands try to pass the buck in terms of responsibility over the workers making their clothes, right? Despite how much they try to deflect responsibility, the people responsible for the awful working conditions in the garment industry are the brands. They know about it. They know they have the power to change it, and they choose not to because it would mean a small dent into their astronomical profits.
Or what are some of your thoughts about how to bring together workers' movements across borders? Because as many differences as there are with these globalized supply chains, it just seems more and more, that the people on either end making the garments at Zara and, the 19-year-old selling them, sometimes the 45-year-old selling them in the shopping center here, that on both ends, there has to be some connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Eugene, in that particularly in the garment industry, international solidarity is very important because you've got the workers in one country, the factory owner is usually based in another country, and then the brands and the consumers are usually based in a third country. And so any attempt to really mobilize pressure on all three of those things by necessity usually involves workers or activists from a variety of different countries. So in some of these campaigns we have going on now, like these union busting campaigns in Myanmar, the union is being attacked in Myanmar. The workers are now coordinating with workers in Korea, where the factory owners are based, workers in the US, where some of the brands are based, workers in Spain, where some of the brands are based, and coordinating in kind of a global pressure campaign. And so I think you're going to see, by necessity, if we're going to start winning some of these struggles, they're going to involve having workers and unions and activists from a variety of different countries coordinating. There's no other way to win. And I mean, my general thinking, Eugene, is through those struggles, if we can launch as many different struggles, very concrete struggles, we will be able to build the type of relationships where there's going to be that type of exchange.
Wow, well, what a powerful interview. And I just want to say, this is why Breakthrough News is so important. You wouldn't hear this story, you wouldn't get this interview on CNN, MSNBC, nowhere else. And I think that's because international workers' solidarity might be a little bit bad for the big corporate business.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Yet another reason to become a patron of Breakthrough News as we continue to bring you things that you have never seen or heard from the front lines of workers' struggles all around the world. But that is going to do it for our show here today.
That's right, Eugene. As always, make sure to follow us if you aren't already on social media at BT Newsroom. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/breakthrough news. Subscribe to us on our YouTube page and keep tuning in every Wednesday at 8.
And remember, don't just watch us, join us on Breakthrough.